Chapter 1. The Umbrella Left Behind. The storm had broken just after the final bell of the charity concert. Outside the Brackenthorp Assembly Hall, wind lashed the towering birch trees into ghostly contortions and drove sheets of rain down the cobbled square with such ferocity that the lingering crowd scattered beneath a flurry of umbrellas and taxis. Inside, the last lingering notes of Brahms's intermezzo still echoed faintly off the wood-panelled walls. Eleanor Delaford, lady patroness of the Brackenthorp Music Society and widow of the late Sir Gregory Delaford, descended the narrow staircase from the balcony with a purse clutched tightly in her gloved hand and a frown creasing her powdered brow. "I do believe someone has taken my umbrella," she announced into the hushed hallway. It was a trivial remark, but the tone carried with it the full force of Eleanor's entitlement. Heads turned. A young steward, barely 20 and awkward in his ill-fitting suit, scurried forward. "Your umbrella, Lady Delaford?" It had a black lacquered handle shaped like a falcon's head. "You cannot mistake it. It belonged to my husband. Most treasured." The steward glanced uncertainly toward the cloakroom. "It might have been misplaced, Lady Delaford." "Misplaced?" She drew herself up. "Or taken." That single word, so casually dropped, seemed to cool the air. By the time the remaining guests had dispersed into the wet night, the umbrella still had not been found, but something else had. At precisely 10:47 p.m., a scream echoed from the lower hallway of the Assembly Hall. Mrs. Verity Carstairs, the elderly pianist who had played the evening's closing solo, had returned to retrieve her shawl. She was the first to discover the body. He was lying crumpled beside the service stairwell, partially obscured by stacked chairs and crates of concert programs. Mid-30s, formally dressed, and unmistakably dead. There was a faint trickle of blood at the temple and one shoe missing from his foot. In his left hand, clutched tightly in death, was the object that would cause much speculation in the hours to come: a black-handled umbrella. Inspector Cawthorne of the Brackenthorp Constabulary arrived 15 minutes later. He was a solid, square-faced man with a stubborn brow and a dislike of nonsense. Within 20 minutes, the hall had been cordoned off, witnesses gathered, and the coroner summoned. "Name?" he asked his sergeant as they examined the body. "Philip Benton. Solicitor's clerk, works in London. Stayed the week with friends here in Brackenthorp for the concert." Cawthorne studied the corpse. The wound on the head was clean. A sharp edge, perhaps, not a blunt instrument. No sign of a struggle. The umbrella, however, didn't seem to belong to him. "No coat," he muttered. "No umbrella rack ticket. And this doesn't look like something a young man would carry." "Could have grabbed it by mistake, sir," offered the sergeant, "or was given it." By morning, the village was already buzzing with whispered theories. Eleanor Delaford made certain to mention to anyone who would listen that the umbrella had been hers. The newspaper vendors ran with it. Mystery death at Brackenthorp. Widow's umbrella clutched in cold hand. It was 2 days later, over a quiet breakfast in London, that Hercule Poirot first encountered the case. Captain Arthur Hastings, fresh from a trip to the countryside, was unfolding a copy of the Daily Echo across the table at Whitehaven Mansions. "My dear Poirot," he said between mouthfuls of toast, "have you seen this frightful story? A man murdered in a concert hall. holding a lady's umbrella, rather like something out of a melodrama. Poirot, who was carefully trimming his boiled egg with fastidious attention, raised an eyebrow. "The details, if you please, Hastings." Read aloud. Philip Benton, aged 34, died under mysterious circumstances following a charity concert in Brackenthorp. Witnesses last saw Mr. Benton leaving his seat during the final intermission. He was later found dead, holding an umbrella belonging to Lady Eleanor Delaford, widow of the former MP and philanthropist Sir Gregory Delaford. Rather odd, isn't it? No motive, no clear means. Poirot leaned back, fingers pressed together. Mon ami, it is precisely such details that interest me. The death of a man is always tragic, but when wrapped in the folds of mystery, and in this case, in the folds of another's umbrella, it becomes a matter requiring the little grey cells. You mean to go down there? I have already sent a telegram to the constable. If he is a man of any discernment, he will welcome assistance. And besides, Poirot added with a twinkle in his eye, I am most curious why a dead man would clutch a lady's umbrella, unless he intended to make a point even as he died. By the time Poirot arrived in Brackenthorp the next day, the tension was palpable. The assembly hall stood sombre and quiet, its great wooden doors now chained shut by police order. Poirot's carriage passed the local tea-room, where gossip floated, thick as steam from the silver kettles, and paused briefly outside the ivy-covered facade of Delaford House. Inside, Lady Eleanor was hosting a closed luncheon. Outside, a man watched from across the street. Pale, narrow-faced, and half-shadowed beneath the awning of a tobacconist. Poirot noted him with a flicker of interest. "Yes," he murmured, as the carriage rolled onward towards the constable's station. "I think there are many umbrellas in this case, some to protect and some to conceal." Chapter 2. The First Clues. The Brackenthorp Constabulary was a modest red-brick building with peeling shutters and a lone constable's bicycle propped beneath the window. Within its narrow front office, Inspector Cawthorne stood at a map-strewn desk, rubbing his forehead as Poirot entered. Immaculate in dove grey, hat perfectly angled, moustache untouched by the journey. "I understand," Poirot began gently, placing his gloves on the counter, "that you are the man in charge of the unfortunate matter involving Mr. Philip Benton." Cawthorne eyed him, sizing up the neatness and polished precision of the little Belgian detective. "And you'd be Monsieur Poirot. Scotland Yard warned me you might appear." Poirot smiled thinly. "Warned you? Mon Dieu, I am not a plague." "No, but you stir things up," Cawthorne replied. "Well then, come stir." He led Poirot to the back room where the late Mr. Benton's personal effects had been laid out. The umbrella rested atop a brown parcel paper sheet, looking oddly out of place. Its black handle, shaped like a falcon's head with opalescent eyes, gleamed under the weak ceiling bulb. "Lady Delaford identified it," said Cawthorne. "Lady Delaford identified it," said Cawthorne. "Says it belonged to her late husband. It went missing the night of the concert, shortly before the body was found." Poirot leaned in. "It is of fine make, French, late 19th century. A gift, perhaps?" "Possibly," said the inspector. "Her ladyship says it was a wedding present. Kept it all these years, claimed it went missing from the cloakroom, but there's no sign of forced entry or tampering." And the body? Found at the base of the stairwell. He was lying face down, umbrella in hand. Clean wound to the right temple, likely from hitting the metal corner of a stair tread. Coroner thinks he fell. Poirot studied the umbrella once more. Would a man fall and still manage to keep such a firm grip on this object? We wondered that too. Rigor mortis had set in by the time we arrived. No clear fingerprints, just smudges. Poirot turned. And his shoe? The report mentioned a missing shoe. Found it the next morning in the orchestra pit, of all places. Ah! Poirot's eyebrows lifted. A curious detail. People rarely lose a shoe unless struggling or running. Cawthorne grunted. There's more. He led Poirot to a table where Benton's wallet, watch ticket stub, and a folded sheet note were laid out. Poirot picked up the note first. Meet me behind the stairwell at 10:45. Come alone. Poirot read aloud, and the time of death. Between 10:45 and 11 p.m., according to the coroner. So he came to the meeting, umbrella in hand, and died minutes later. Exactly. No one saw him after the second intermission. Witnesses say he was agitated. One thought he argued with someone near the refreshment table, but no one saw the other party. Poirot tilted his head. Monsieur Benton, he had enemies. Worked in legal affairs for McInnes and Holt, a property firm in London. Clean record. Visited Brackenthorp occasionally. Stayed with the Cartwrights this week. Close friends. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And where are these Cartwrights now? At home. They've been cooperative. You'll find them on the edge of the village, Cypress Lane. A Mr. Edwin Cartwright and his daughter, Lillian. Poirot reached for the umbrella again, turning it with delicate fingers. Did Lady Delaford say why she had brought the umbrella that night? Surely it was not raining until after the concert. Cawthorne frowned. Said it was habit, that she always carried it when leaving the house. Poirot nodded slowly. And the cloakroom? No staff saw Benton retrieve it. No, but there's a twist. 2 umbrellas went missing that night. Hers, and another black one with a simpler curved handle. That one belonged to Dr. Calder. Turned up the next day near the lavatory exit. Abandoned. Poirot's face brightened, and he clapped his hands softly. Ah, that is most helpful. 2 umbrellas exchanged. It is not merely a case of a missing object. It is a case of mistaken identity. But was the mistake accidental or deliberate? Later that morning, Poirot requested a visit to the Assembly Hall. Though still cordoned off, Inspector Cawthorne permitted entrance. Inside, the concert hall bore the faint must of fading music and damp wood polish. The chairs stood in even rows, untouched since the night of the tragedy. Poirot moved through the aisles with silent steps. Hastings, who had arrived just moments earlier by the morning train, followed dutifully. "What do you think, Poirot?" Hastings asked, glancing around. "I think, mon ami, that every murderer hopes the chaos of a crowd will hide his intentions. But humans, even when lying, are creatures of habit. They betray themselves with gestures, with omissions." They reached the stairwell. Poirot paused at the landing, peering downward where the metal edging caught the light. The spot where Benton had fallen was marked with a faint chalk outline. Poirot crouched, staring with hawk-like focus. "There is no blood on the lower steps," he murmured, "which means he struck his head not in a fall from above, but likely in a horizontal blow, perhaps thrown or shoved at close range. Look at the height of the corner step. It aligns with the wound. He rose again. The angle of impact suggests it was not an accident, and Monsieur Hastings noted the theatre posters by the stairwell. Hastings squinted. What about them? Which direction do they face? Well, toward the back corridor, I suppose. Precisely. And that corridor would have been dim. The assailant could wait there unseen, lure Benton in, and disappear afterward through the service entrance. There is even a staff passage leading to the side alley. They turned to leave, Poirot pausing one last time at the base of the steps. The umbrella, he said, half to himself. It was either planted, or he took it to identify someone, or something. There is a message in it, I am certain. Hastings looked puzzled. You think the umbrella is a signal? I think, Hastings, Poirot replied, that the man who was meant to die that night might not have been Philip Benton at all. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. The drawing-room of the Cartwright residence on Cypress Lane was sun-drenched and deceptively tranquil. A room of lace curtains, dried lavender, and the faint scent of furniture polish. Yet the tension hung thick as Poirot took his seat in the high-backed armchair and surveyed the household like a general inspecting a battalion. Edwin Cartwright, retired bank manager, 63, bespectacled and stiff-lipped, offered tea in the manner of a man who resented intrusion, though he was too well-bred to say so aloud. His daughter, Lillian, tall and austere in a navy dress, stood near the window, hands clasped tightly behind her back. I must confess, Edwin said, lowering the silver teapot with a clink. We're still in shock. Philip was like family. Poirot bowed his head slightly. And you had known Mr. Benton for how long, monsieur? 5 years, perhaps a bit longer. He and my late son, Algernon, attended university together. Philip often visited during summer holidays. Even after my son passed, he remained in joy and touch. Quite devoted. Lillian's voice, when it came, was soft and clear. He had a generous heart. Poirot turned toward her. Miss Cartwright, you were at the concert, were you not? I was seated with father in the front row. You didn't see Philip after the second intermission. He said he was going to speak to the conductor about a charitable donation. Did he seem distressed? Preoccupied? Her brow furrowed. He was tense, more so than usual. But he didn't say why. Poirot nodded. And did either of you see Lady Delaford that evening? Of course, Edwin replied. Everyone did. She's the grande dame of Brackenthorp, always sweeping about with an air of royal contempt. She spoke to Philip, always sweeping about with an air of royal contempt. She spoke to Philip briefly during the interval. Ah, Poirot said quietly. And what of the note he received? Were you aware of any clandestine meeting he intended to keep? Both father and daughter shook their heads. No. But Philip was private, Edwin added. He never gossiped, never revealed much. Poirot made a small note. Did Mr. Benton have any enemies you are aware of? Or entanglements? A pause. Lillian looked toward her father before speaking. There were rumors. Poirot raised a brow. Last year, Philip came down for the harvest ball. He spent quite some time in conversation with Lady Delaford's companion, Miss Clara Ridley. A shy woman, not well off. There were whispers that Lady Delaford was displeased. Why? Because Clara has been in her service for 10 years. She relies on her for everything, and she despises the idea of Clara leaving, especially to marry. She made that known rather loudly to several guests. Philip left early that night. Interesting, Poirot murmured. And Miss Ridley, she was present at the concert? Yes, Lillian said. We saw her. She left shortly after the performance. I think she was unwell. Poirot's gaze lingered on her a moment longer before rising. Merci, mademoiselle. I believe the shadows around Monsieur Benton are beginning to shift. Lady Eleanor Delaford received Poirot at Delaford House with the poise of a reigning duchess entertaining a minor foreign ambassador. The parlour was suffocatingly elegant. Velvet drapes, oil portraits, a ticking ormolu clock, and a caged canary that did not sing. She reclined on a chaise, a martini glass untouched beside her. Monsieur Poirot, she intoned, as if reciting a name from a theatre programme. I suppose the death of poor Mr. Benton has reached the ears of the criminal Illuminati. I come not as a celebrity, madame, but as a seeker of truth. Of course you do. She extended a gloved hand, and Poirot bowed over it slightly. Clara Ridley, a pale and slight woman in her early 30s, hovered quietly by the fireplace, her eyes lowered. You knew the deceased well, Lady Delaford. Well enough to know he did not belong in Brackenthorp. A clever young man, no doubt, but ambitious, too ambitious. Poirot gave a small smile. Ambition is not a crime. It is when it distracts the mind, when it causes poor Clara to cry herself to sleep over foolish dreams. Clara flinched slightly but said nothing. Mr. Benton, Poirot asked, was seen speaking with you during the intermission. A brief word. He was always pestering Clara with invitations. I advised her to decline. He was not her class. Yet the umbrella, your umbrella, was found in his hand. You have no explanation for this. Lady Delaford's lips thinned. I told the constable I left it in the cloakroom. It must have been taken, perhaps deliberately, or perhaps by mistake. Would Mr. Benton have known it was yours? Certainly. He had a good memory for symbols. That falcon's head was unique. Poirot's gaze shifted to Clara. And you, mademoiselle, did you see Mr. Benton that night? Her voice was scarcely above a whisper. Briefly. He passed me in the hallway. He looked afraid. Poirot leaned forward. Afraid of what? I don't know, he said. It's all gone wrong. And then he was gone. Lady Delaford scoffed. He was melodramatic, always had a flair for the theatrical, but Poirot did not look at her. He looked at Clara. What, mademoiselle, had gone so wrong? She did not answer. The list of attendees narrowed as Poirot worked his way through interviews. Dr. Calder, who recovered his own umbrella from the corridor the morning after, was evasive and unhelpful. He had left early due to a migraine. Hugh, conductor, and Mr. Milbury remembered Benton's approach, but dismissed it as mumbled nonsense about legal trouble. The pianist, Mrs. Carstairs, revealed she had heard footsteps by the stairwell moments before her scream, but had assumed it was a cleaner. As the afternoon dimmed, Hastings joined Poirot for a walk beneath the dripping trees lining the square. "And pretty odd mix, eh, Poirot? We've got a proud widow, a frightened companion, a lost love affair, and a man who is clearly meeting someone in secret." "Yes, Hastings," Poirot said, nodding. "And someone among them is lying. Not about the murder, but about who the victim was meant to be. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. It was just after 3:30 the following day when Hercule Poirot returned to the Brackenthorp Assembly Hall, not as a guest, but as a man now fully in command of the crime. Though the building remained closed to the public, Inspector Cawthorne had granted Poirot full access under certain conditions. Constables lingered in corners, eyeing him with guarded curiosity as he moved across the parquet floor like a surgeon inspecting an operating theatre. Poirot paused in the central aisle, shoes echoing in the vast silence, and looked up to the dim brass chandeliers. "It is here," he murmured, "that the mystery truly begins, not in the finding of the body, but in the mingling of motive and opportunity under the veil of civility." Hastings trailed behind, notebook in hand. "You think someone else was the intended victim, then?" Poirot turned. "There is a possibility, mon ami. Consider this. A man receives a note telling him to meet in secret. He goes, and he dies, but not by accident. He is found holding an umbrella that belongs to a woman who insists she lost it. And that same woman is known to have disliked the victim, perhaps feared him. Is it not reasonable to wonder, what if the umbrella was not just a symbol, but a signal? But a signal to whom? That, Poirot said, is precisely what we must discover. He made his way to the stairwell again. The chalk outline remained faintly visible, though scuffed by foot traffic. Poirot crouched once more and examined the metal edging of the third step. Still faint blood on the right-hand corner, he noted aloud. And look, scrapes on the rail beside it. Someone gripped it too tightly. Perhaps the victim, perhaps the killer. He stood brushing his knees. There is a performance to every crime, Hastings. The killer enters, the victim is lured, the deed is done, and the scene is crafted for interpretation. But it is never perfect. Always something leaks through. In the adjoining room, the performer's lounge, Poirot conducted his first on-site interview with Mrs. Carstairs, the pianist who had found the body. She arrived wrapped in a camel coat, her manner brittle with nerves. "I still see him," she murmured, hands fluttering as she sat, lying there like a broken puppet. It was grotesque. "You heard a noise before discovering broken puppet." It was grotesque. "You heard a noise before discovering him." Footsteps. Light. Hurried. "I thought it was a cleaner, or someone retrieving something left behind." "Could you identify direction?" "They came from the rear stairwell, but I didn't see anyone. Just the sound. Then the body." Poirot leaned forward. "Did you know Mr. Benton?" "Barely. He introduced himself to me 2 nights prior. Said he admired my playing. I thought him polite, perhaps a touch too attentive." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Attentive in what sense?" She blushed. He was curious about the patrons. Asked about Lady Delaford, her companion. Too many questions for a casual acquaintance. "Ticker?" He mentioned why. "No. But now I wonder, was he investigating something?" Poirot thanked her and watched as she departed, lost in thought. By late afternoon, Poirot had summoned several of the key players to the Assembly Hall under the pretense of a formal review. They gathered in the rear gallery. Lady Delaford in stiff silks and disdain, Clara Ridley beside her, pale as parchment, Edwin and Lillian Cartwright subdued, Dr. Calder aloof and irritable. Poirot stood in front of them as though conducting an orchestra. "You will forgive me," he began, "if I speak plainly. I believe the death of Mr. Benton was not only deliberate, it was preventable. Someone in this room holds the key." Lady Delaford arched an eyebrow. "You presume too much, Monsieur Poirot." "No, madame. I presume only what the facts suggest. The umbrella, for example. Why would a man on the verge of death grasp it so tightly unless it meant something? A final message, perhaps, or a clue?" "It was my umbrella," she said stiffly. "He stole it." Poirot held up a finger. "Or perhaps he was given it. Perhaps it was swapped with intent. Perhaps the killer expected someone else to arrive with that symbol. And when it was Benton who appeared, it changed everything." Gasps fluttered from the others. "You're suggesting," Edwin Cartwright said slowly, "that Benton wasn't the target?" "I am suggesting," Poirot replied, "that the black-handled umbrella was never meant for him, but for the person who would carry it that night, a person expected at that very stairwell. If the killer was waiting in the shadows, relying on a signal—" He paused. "Then the question is, who was meant to carry the umbrella?" The silence stretched thick. Lillian Cartwright was the first to speak. "It would have been obvious that night. Everyone knows Lady Delaford's umbrella. The falcon's head is distinctive." "Exactly," Poirot said. "It would be seen even from behind. But suppose it had been stolen before the concert? Suppose its appearance in the victim's hand wasn't coincidence, but confusion?" Lady Delaford's voice was sharp. "You mean to imply that someone planned to kill me?" Poirot did not answer. Instead, he turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle Ridley, did Mr. Benton ever speak of danger? Of secrets?" Her hands trembled. "He said he was afraid. That something he had uncovered wasn't just scandal, it was deadly." Poirot approached, voice gentle. "And did he ever mention a document? A will, perhaps? A contract?" Clara hesitated. "Yes, a letter. He said it would change everything. That someone would do anything to stop it." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Then we must find that letter, for I believe it is the true motive behind this crime." As the group departed, Poirot lingered in the empty hall, watching their backs retreat one by one. "Someone in that room," he said softly to Hastings, "is dancing on a wire, mon ami. And the deeper we tread, the more desperate they will become." Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. Begin rain drizzled softly on the village roofs the next morning, tapping against window panes with the rhythm of quiet dread. Hercule Poirot, however, was immune to the weather's melancholy. He sat in the library of the Cartwright home with a notebook open before him, ready to conduct his first round of private interviews. One by one, the people orbiting Philip Benton would arrive, each carrying their own secrets, perhaps unknowingly, perhaps too knowingly. Edwin Cartwright was the first to enter. He walked stiffly, as if steeling himself for interrogation, and took the seat opposite Poirot with the air of a man determined to defend his integrity. "You are a man of order, Monsieur Cartwright," Poirot said gently. "You value routine. Tell me, did Mr. Benton's behavior last week disturb your sense of routine?" Edwin hesitated. He was not himself, distracted, irritable. Normally, Philip enjoyed conversation, chess, even gardening with Lillian. But this visit, he seemed tense, secretive. Did he mention why? He said only that he was handling something delicate, something that might change his future. Poirot leaned forward. Did that worry you? Edwin adjusted his spectacles. A little. I asked him plainly if he was in legal trouble. He laughed and said no, but I didn't believe him. If you suspect a romantic motive. Edwin's jaw tightened. I suspected he had ambitions beyond his station. He admired Lillian. He admired Clara Ridley. But he also admired wealth. And some men think they can marry their way into it. Did you disapprove of his interest in your daughter? I would have preferred a more stable man. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet you let him stay under your roof. He was my son's friend, Edwin said, and he had nowhere else to go. Poirot made a note and gestured toward the door. Merci, Monsieur Cartwright. Lillian Cartwright entered next. She wore the same navy blue dress as before, though this time her composure had softened. She folded her hands in her lap and met Poirot's eyes without hesitation. You and Mr. Benton were close, Poirot began. More than friends? She paused before answering. Once, perhaps, but not recently. He had changed. Changed in what way? Lillian exhaled. He was charming, confident, but underneath he had begun to shift. He was anxious, always glancing over his shoulder. I asked him one night if he owed someone money. He said, no, it's worse than that. Poirot's brow lifted. Did he elaborate? He said he'd found something. A lie. Something buried. And that if he didn't bring it to light, someone else might get hurt. Did he name anyone? She shook her head. Only said it involved a very old promise. Broken. I thought he meant his firm, perhaps a client issue. And did you know about the letter? Her gaze flickered. Yes. He said he was hiding it in a safe place until he could decide what to do. Poirot smiled faintly. Mademoiselle, do you know where that place might be? No. But Mademoiselle, do you know where that place might be? No. But he didn't trust many people. If he hid it anywhere, it would have been where only he could retrieve it. Poirot's next visitor was Clara Ridley. She sat with her shoulders hunched, a pale hand clutching her wrist. There was something brittle about her, as though a sudden noise might shatter her entirely. Mademoiselle, Poirot began softly, forgive me, but I must ask you questions that may cause discomfort. You understand, do you not? She nodded. You and Mr. Benton, there was affection. Yes, she whispered. He said he wanted to leave London, to start over, that he could make a life for both of us. I told him Lady Delaford would never allow it. And how did he respond? He laughed. He said she would have to let go eventually. He said he had something that would make her agree. Poirot's voice was calm. A letter, perhaps. Clara hesitated, then nodded. He never showed it to me, but he said it would make her understand. He said it was signed in her own hand. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And did Lady Delaford know of this? I think she suspected. She began watching us more closely. That night, at the concert, she refused to let me out of her sight. When I told her I had a headache, she snapped, said I was being ungrateful. Ungrateful? Clara's voice cracked. She reminded me that she took me in, that she rescued me from poverty, that I owed her my loyalty. Poirot leaned back. And what of the umbrella? Did Mr. Benton ever comment on it? Clara shook her head. No. But Lady Delaford was furious when she realized it was missing. I heard her in the cloakroom, saying, "Someone has taken it, deliberately." Poirot tapped his notebook slowly. "And you did not go to the stairwell that night?" "No, I never left the foyer after the final performance. I was too afraid of being seen." Poirot gave a slight bow of his head. "Merci, mademoiselle." Later that day, Poirot met with Dr. Kildare, who appeared more irritated than grieved. "Such theatrics," the doctor muttered as he sat. "All this over a fall." "You still believe it was a fall?" "I examined the body with the coroner. Blunt trauma. Could have been a fall. Could have been a push. We'll never know now." "You left early that evening?" "Had a migraine. I often do. I left around 10:15. Passed Lady Delaford on my way out. She was scolding Clara again." "And the umbrella?" "Not mine. Mine was the one found near the lavatory, remember. Someone likely took it by mistake." "Or swapped it intentionally," Poirot said. The doctor's brow furrowed. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Poirot said quietly, "that someone may have intended to frame a death around a distinctive object." The doctor scoffed. "You detectives read too many novels." Poirot smiled. "And you, monsieur, may read too little." As evening settled over Brackenthorp, Poirot and Hastings returned to the guest-house where they were staying. Hastings poured 2 cups of tea, while Poirot sat, legs crossed, staring into the fire. "They're all hiding something," Hastings said, "but none of them quite fit as a killer." "That is because, mon ami," Poirot said, "we are not yet seeing the truth. We are seeing only the fear. It is like fog over the mirror, but the fog is beginning to clear." Hastings frowned. "What will you do next?" Poirot sipped his tea and smiled. "Now, Hastings, now I begin to play the psychological game." Chapter 6. The first false edit was just past 10 the following morning when the first tremor of apparent resolution rippled through Brackenthorp. Inspector Cawthorne arrived at the guest-house with an energy Poirot had not yet seen in him, and Snedder, coat still wet from the rain, and his moustache bristling with restrained satisfaction. "Found something, have we, mon inspecteur?" Poirot asked, folding his newspaper with deliberate slowness. "We have, indeed, or rather, someone found it for us." He held up a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a sheet of parchment, creased, slightly smudged, and bearing unmistakably elegant handwriting art. Poirot accepted it with gloved hands. As he read, his brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in curiosity. "I can no longer carry this secret. I came to Brackenthorp to do what is right, but it may be too late. If anything happens, to me look to the one who holds the truth captive, the woman who hides behind silken power." Unsigned. No date, no direct accusation, but unmistakable in implication. "It was found this morning," Cawthorne said, "tucked into the bottom drawer of Clara Ridley's dressing-table, hidden beneath a layer of sewing patterns." "Parbleu," Poirot murmured. "That is most interesting." "She claims she didn't write it, said she never saw it before. But the handwriting is hers, or close enough, and the implication is that she intended to expose Lady Delaford." Cawthorne gave a grim nod, and perhaps feared for her life, or faked a warning in case things went wrong. Either way, It looks very bad." Poirot tapped the plastic lightly. "And yet, I wonder, you don't think it's hers?" "I think," Poirot replied, rising, "that whoever placed it there intended us to believe so. And that, mon ami, is never a mark of innocence." Poirot and Hastings arrived at Delaford House shortly before noon. Clara was seated alone in the morning room, her hands folded in her lap like a child awaiting punishment. Her pale cheeks flushed when she saw the letter in Poirot's hand. "You found it," she said, but there was no relief in her voice, only dread. "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "tucked away in your belongings. Can you explain how it came to be there?" I can't," she stammered. "It's not mine. I didn't write it." "Do you deny the handwriting is similar?" "It might be, but it's not mine." Poirot stepped closer. "Did Mr. Benton ever mention writing a letter of confession, or leaving a warning?" Clara swallowed. "He said he'd written something to ensure the truth came out, but he never showed it to me. He said it would protect me if anything happened." Poirot observed her carefully. There was no guile in her manner, no over-rehearsed defences. If she were lying, she was either remarkably skilled or genuinely afraid. Lady Delaford entered moments later, her heels clicking sharply on the parquet floor. She took one look at the letter and narrowed her eyes. "More melodrama," she said, voice cool. "Really, this is becoming intolerable." "It names you," Poirot said mildly. "Or rather, implies you." "Of course it does. Everything does. It's always easier to blame the rich." "Of course it does. Everything does. It's always easier to blame the rich." "You believe it was planted?" "I believe Clara is capable of more cunning than she lets on. She's not a helpless child, Monsieur Poirot." Clara rose, anger trembling just beneath the surface. "You think I would murder a man I loved? You think I could hide a letter I never saw? Enough!" Lady Delaford snapped. "You're not to raise your voice under my roof." But Poirot was watching both women, not for their words, but their reactions. The way Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of her dress. The way Lady Delaford's chin lifted just a fraction too high. The tension between them was not that of employer and companion. It was older, deeper, one rooted not just in class, but control. "Madam," Poirot said, "was there ever a formal contract of employment between you and Miss Ridley?" "A contract? Certainly not. I rescued her, took her in when she had nothing." "And has she nothing still?" Poirot asked, voice gentle. Lady Delaford's mouth curled. "Not if she defies me." Poirot bowed. "Merci. That is most enlightening." As the day wore on, whispers began to stir through the village. That Clara Ridley had left a note. That she had been involved in a clandestine affair. That Philip Benton had threatened to reveal Lady Delaford's past, whatever that might mean. The insinuations became their own kind of evidence. By mid-afternoon, Clara was effectively under suspicion. She was not arrested. Cawthorne was cautious, but she was asked not to leave the village. Her walks were observed. Her conversations were monitored. Hastings, ever the romantic, fumed. "She's being hunted, Poirot, and I still don't believe." "She did it?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Nor do I. But it is important to let the wind blow where it may. A fire fanned too soon dies. A fire allowed to breathe reveals the shape of its flame. Hastings blinked. Which is to say, let them believe she is guilty. For now, the real killer will grow bold when he thinks he is safe. At dusk, Poirot visited the assembly hall once more. There, in the cloakroom, he studied the rack. Again, 2 umbrella hooks stood out, numbers 17 and 18. The logbook showed Lady Delaford had been assigned 18. He traced the rough grain of hook 17 and crouched just beneath the wooden panel. Behind a hinge, something caught his eye. A thin, dark thread. He plucked it free. "Black wool," he said aloud. "And not from Clara's garments, I think. Something coarser, older." He smiled. Then, from the shadows beyond the corridor, a faint shuffle of movement. "Who's there?" Hastings called out. No answer, but Poirot did not move to chase. He only murmured, "The game begins again, mon ami. Let them follow the false trail, while we follow the truth." Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The next morning dawned with a ghostly pallor hanging over Brackenthorp. A heavy mist crept through the hedgerows, rendering the village almost spectral. Inside the drawing-room of the guest-house, Poirot sat in his usual place by the fireplace, shoes immaculately polished, moustaches waxed to perfection. But his gaze was distant, and his fingers drummed softly against the armrest. Hastings entered with a plate of toast and a fresh copy of the Brackenthorp Gazette. "They're calling her the Black Widow now," he muttered grimly, throwing the paper down. "It's appalling. She hasn't even been charged." Poirot picked up the headline without touching the plate. "Silken Lies and Stolen Love. Murder in the Shadows of Delaford House." He sighed. "The court of public opinion, Hastings, is more dangerous than any gallows. Once a narrative begins, people shape themselves around it. But that is precisely where psychology enters the stage." "You mean you're going to start pressuring them?" Poirot gave a quiet smile. "No, I am going to observe how they pressure one another." He began with Edwin Cartwright. The retired banker was in his garden, pruning a boxwood hedge with the same mechanical precision he applied to his words. When Poirot approached, Edwin looked up with a short nod. "Came to ask if I've changed my story, have you?" "Not at all, monsieur," Poirot said with a courteous bow. "I came to ask what you believe." Edwin blinked. "What I believe?" "Yes. Do you believe Clara Ridley murdered Philip Benton?" Edwin frowned. "I'm a man of facts, Monsieur Poirot. The letter was in her room. She had motive, and she had means. If I were on a jury, I'd find it hard to acquit. Yet," Poirot said, gesturing lightly to the hedge, "facts are often shaped like topiary. You trim what is overgrown. You hide what is inconvenient. Are you accusing me of something? Only of thinking in straight lines. But murder, Monsieur Cartwright, is rarely a straight line." Edwin's hands paused on the shears. "Knew Philip was planning something," he said finally. "He hinted at exposing a lie. He said some people were not what they seemed. I assumed he meant Eleanor Delaford." Poirot tilted his head. "Why?" "Because she has enemies, quiet ones, and she likes control. The kind of woman who'd sooner destroy something than lose it." Poirot nodded. "Merci." Next, Poirot returned to Delaford House. He had asked Clara to wait in the conservatory, a sun-dappled room of ferns and silence. Instead, he went to speak with Lady Delaford first. She received him in her private sitting-room, reclined in a rose-coloured armchair, a fine china teacup perched between her fingers. She had not dressed yet, and the sight of her in a silk robe and pearls gave the impression of a spider in silk. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, come to accuse me again." "Not at all, madame. I came to ask how it feels to have one's household whisper behind closed doors." She narrowed her eyes. "If you're looking for confessions, try Clara. That girl has always been trouble." "I suspect," Poirot said softly. "You fear her, madam." Lady Delaford's jaw stiffened. She was loyal once, devoted, but ambition seeps into everything. That boy, Philip, he filled her head with promises. She forgot her place. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And what of your place, madame? What is it that binds you to this house? You speak of inheritance, yet Sir Gregory's will left no mention of Clara. Why the possessiveness?" Lady Delaford stood. "Because I built her. She was nothing, no family, no name. She became respectable only because I allowed it." Poirot bowed slightly. "Then you must understand how frightened she must have been, knowing what you might do to her." Lady Delaford turned her back, but Poirot caught the slightest tremble in her hand as she reached for her glass. The slightest tremble in her hand as she reached for her glass. He said no more, and left. The trap, such as it was, came into play that afternoon. Poirot sent handwritten invitations to the principal figures, Edwin and Lillian Cartwright, Dr. Calder, Clara Ridley, and Lady Delaford, to attend a private clarification of timeline and facts at the Assembly Hall. By 4:30, they were all seated beneath the faded grandeur of the stage lights, facing Poirot like schoolchildren in detention. "Let us walk through the evening again," Poirot began, his voice calm but precise. Mr. Benton left his seat at 10:35. He was found dead at 10:47. The interval ended at 10:55. In those 12 minutes, someone lured him to the stairwell and killed him. He paced slowly. We know he received a note. We know he was carrying an umbrella not his own. And we know that umbrella was recognized by all. Now, let us imagine someone else, someone watching, who saw the umbrella and mistook the man beneath it. Lady Delaford's mouth opened slightly. "Suppose," Poirot continued, "you were expecting a woman, a companion, a threat to your reputation, your secrets, your wealth. You wait, you see the silhouette, you act. But the man was not the woman, and now all is chaos." Gasps echoed faintly. Dr. Calder shifted in his seat. Lillian's eyes darted to her father. Poirot's gaze swept the room. And now, with suspicion on the wrong person, the real killer watches, calm, perhaps even amused. But they forget. People speak. Emotions fray. And lies do not align when pressed. He turned suddenly to Clara. "Mademoiselle, I ask you, who knew Mr. Benton's schedule that evening? Who would have known when he would leave his seat, when he would walk the hallway?" She hesitated. "Lillian. She helped organize the seating." Poirot nodded. "And who had access to your belongings?" She looked to Lady Delaford. "Only her, and maybe Lillian. I don't know." Poirot let silence fall. Then, "And who stood to lose everything if Philip Benton revealed what he knew?" He did not wait for the answer. He merely looked at each of them in turn. One flinched. It was not Clara. It was Lillian. Poirot saw it, the flicker of the eyelid, The clenched hand, the lips parted ever so slightly. But he said nothing. He merely smiled. "The game, mes amis, is almost over. But before the curtain falls, someone will make a mistake." Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The following morning, just as the mist was beginning to lift from the hedgerows and the distant chimes of St. Matilda's clock struck 9, a flustered constable arrived at the guest-house with urgent news. Poirot, already seated at breakfast with Hastings, calmly set down his teaspoon and turned his full attention to the young man's trembling fingers and blotched complexion. "There's been another incident," the constable blurted. "At Delaford House, Miss Ridley's room was broken into." Poirot's eyes gleamed, though his voice remained calm. "What has been taken?" "Nothing of great value, sir. But a jewellery box was opened, letters disturbed, the drawer where that clanted note was found ransacked again, and, well, one of Lady Delaford's signet rings was discovered tucked under the mattress." Hastings looked up from his toast. "The thief left a ring." "More likely," Poirot said softly. "The thief planted it." By 10 o'clock, Poirot and Hastings stood once more in Clara Ridley's modest bedroom. The floral curtains fluttered lightly in the breeze from the open window. Her dressing-table had been swept into disarray. Hairbrushes, a folded scarf, an overturned photograph of her younger self at the seaside. "Tell me exactly how you found it," Poirot asked the housemaid, a nervous girl named Elsie, who wrung her hands in her apron. "I came in to dust the floor, sir, just after 7. I always start with Miss Ridley's room, same as every day. But the drawer was pulled out, and there was paper everywhere, like someone had been digging through her letters." "Did you notice the window?" "It was unlatched, but Miss Ridley always keeps it open a crack at night." Poirot moved to it and tested the frame. No signs of forced entry. So either the intruder knew this window would be left open, or it was someone with access to the room already. Elsie hesitated, then spoke quickly. "Pardon me, sir, but Lady Delaford has keys to every room. So does Mr. Pelham, the groundskeeper. But he hasn't been near the house since the concert." Poirot turned slowly. "And the ring? Who found it?" "Miss Ridley herself, sir. She fainted when she saw it." Poirot nodded. "Merci, mademoiselle." Clara sat on the edge of the divan, her face drawn and pale, a teacup untouched in her lap. "They're trying to frame me again," she said in a thin voice. "It's like someone's laying out a path made of breadcrumbs, one I didn't drop." "You believe it is the same person who planted the note?" "I'm certain of it, and now they're escalating. It's like they're trying to destroy me." Poirot paced slowly across the room, arms behind his back. "Madame Delaford will claim the ring proves your access. But tell me, mademoiselle, did Mr. Benton ever speak of a document? Not just a letter, but something official? A deed, a contract, a last will?" Clara frowned. "A will? No, but—" She looked up suddenly. "He said he'd found something in a deed box from years ago. Said it involved a trust, money left in confidence, and that someone had tampered with it." Poirot stopped walking. "Did he say who the money was meant for?" "No, but he said if it came to light, it would ruin someone important." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then I believe this break-in was not about your character, But about that document. Someone thinks you have it. But I don't. No, Poirot said gently. But perhaps they think Philip gave it to you. By midday, Poirot requested a private interview with Lillian Cartwright. They met in the reading room of the Brackenthorp library, where the scent of old paper hung in the air like a faint perfume. Lillian arrived punctually, dressed in deep green, her expression unreadable. "I trust this won't take long," she said crisply. "Father is already upset you're still stirring things." Poirot offered her a seat. "You have worked closely with the Music Society, mademoiselle, including finances." She frowned. "Yes, I managed the ledgers. What of it?" "And did Mr. Benton ever question the handling of donations?" She stiffened. "You think this is about money?" "I think," Poirot said carefully, "that Mr. Benton found inconsistencies, and that those inconsistencies threatened someone. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you ever see Philip Benton near Delaford House before the concert night?" Her lips parted. I may have. Once, in the garden, speaking with Clara." "Were they arguing?" "No, but it looked intense." "Did you confront him?" "No," she said after a pause. "But I warned Clara to be careful. I told her she was making herself vulnerable." Poirot gave her a long, thoughtful look. "You're a clever woman, Mademoiselle Cartwright. Precise, practical. You would not act on impulse. But if pushed far enough, you might act to protect a legacy." She stiffened. "If you're accusing me—" "I accuse no one," Poirot interrupted, "but I observe everyone." Later that afternoon, Poirot and Hastings sat once more at the Assembly Hall, reviewing the case in silence. "It's almost like there are two crimes now," Hastings said. "One surrounding Benton's death, and one happening after. This break-in, the ring, the letter." Poirot tapped his chin. "Oui, and that is no coincidence. The second crime reveals the fear left in the wake of the first. Someone is desperate to control the narrative, to erase traces." He leaned forward suddenly. "Hastings, we must consider not only who wanted Benton silenced, but who had the imagination to orchestrate deception afterward. The false note, the staged ring, these are not acts of panic, they are acts of design. Lady Delaford, she is proud, yes, dangerous when cornered. But this has the touch of cold logic." Poirot paused, then rose. "We are missing the final piece of this secondary puzzle, and I suspect it lies with the lawyer who knew Benton best." As the light dimmed, Poirot sent a telegram to McInnes and Holt, Philip Benton's firm in London, requesting immediate information regarding recent property inquiries, will management, and old client trusts, especially those involving the Delaford estate. He folded the paper with care. "If I am correct," he murmured, "this will not only solve the murder, but reveal why Benton died holding the one item designed to summon death to someone else." Hastings looked up. "You mean the umbrella?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, mon ami. The umbrella was a disguise, but not for the killer, for the target." Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The following day arrived with a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Less fog, more tension. It was as though Brackenthorp itself was holding its breath. Hercule Poirot was already impeccably dressed and standing at the window of his guest-house room when a knock came at the door. Hastings entered with a telegram clutched in his hand, and a face that suggested it was not an invitation to tea. "From McInnes and Holt," he said. "Finally. Took them long enough." Poirot unfolded the telegram with delicate precision. As his eyes scanned the message, his expression sharpened, and the creases at the corners of his eyes deepened. "Regarding your inquiry into Mr. Philip Benton's recent casework, he had been reviewing the Delaford Trust, specifically an alteration made in 1926 following the death of Sir Gregory Delaford's brother, Arnold. Mr. Benton had flagged irregularities in the inheritance clause. Internal memo suggests he believed the trust's legal successor was not Lady Eleanor Delaford, but an unnamed ward referenced in a sealed supplement. Benton intended to request a judicial review. The document is missing from our archives." McInnes and Holt. "Mon Dieu," Poirot breathed. "Now it begins to make sense." "What does?" Hastings asked, frowning. Poirot turned toward him slowly. "Everything, Hastings. The motive, the misdirection, the fear. The document that vanished Benton knew of it. He realized the true beneficiary of the Delaford estate may not be Lady Eleanor at all." Hastings looked shocked. "Then who?" "That," Poirot said with a glint in his eye, "is what we must now uncover. But I believe we already know. We have simply not recognized them." By midday, Poirot paid a second visit to Delaford House, this time requesting a quiet walk with Lady Delaford through the upper gallery. She granted it, though not graciously. "You do enjoy a performance, Monsieur Poirot." "It is not performance I seek," he said, "but truth." They walked slowly past the ancestral portraits. Delaford's going back 3 generations. The painted eyes seemed to watch them, severe and disapproving. "Tell me, madame," Poirot began, "did your late husband ever speak of his brother Arnold?" Her lips thinned. "Not often. Arnold was a drunk, a gambler. Died in disgrace in Chirhut, 1926. My husband rarely mentioned him." "And did you know of a child?" "That stopped her." What are you implying?" "That Arnold may have had a child. A ward, at least, whose name was protected by legal discretion. A child who may have had a claim to the Delaford Trust." Lady Delaford turned sharply toward Poirot. "That is nonsense, is it? Then why did Philip Benton travel to Brackenthorp with a sealed envelope marked Delaford Trust? Why did he schedule a private meeting with your solicitor in the week before his death?" "I don't know," she snapped, "and I'm growing tired of these insinuations." Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "Did you fear he would expose something you spent years suppressing?" For a moment she said nothing. Then coldly, "Get out of my house." Poirot bowed. "But of course." Outside, Hastings was waiting, near the gate. "No progress?" "On the contrary," Poirot replied. "Her silence has confirmed everything." They walked together down Cypress Lane, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. Poirot appeared deep in thought, but Hastings had learned to recognize the look, not so much thought as calculation. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," Poirot said, "we visit the one person who has tried very hard not to speak, because if anyone knew Arnold Delaford's secrets, it was the woman he left behind." The cottage of Mrs. Whitlow, former housekeeper to Sir Gregory, and Arnold Delaford stood at the far end of the village, just past the woods. It was a small ivy-covered structure with a low thatched roof and a crooked chimney. She greeted them with suspicion. "I've nothing to say to newspapers," she barked. "But we are not journalists, madam," Poirot replied with a bow. "We seek only the truth of the past, the truth of a child who may have been hidden." That her face changed. "You should go," she said, stepping back. But her voice trembled. Poirot did not move. "Mrs. Whitlow, Philip Benton died for what he uncovered. I believe he came to you before he died. I believe he asked questions about a child born in 1925, before Arnold Delaford vanished from Brackenthorp." The old woman's hands shook slightly as she gripped the doorframe. He came. He asked. I told him what I remembered." "And what do you remember?" A long silence followed. Then she motioned them inside. The sitting room was warm, dim, and smelled faintly of coal and lavender. Mrs. Whitlow sat across from them, clutching her shawl. "There was a girl," she said, "born to a scullery maid. Never named the father, but we all knew. Arnold was a brute. Always took what he wanted." "The child?" Poirot asked. "Sent away. Raised by another family here in the village. Nobody ever said it aloud, but everyone knew. The mother died soon after. The child was taken in by the Ransoms." Poirot blinked. "The Ransoms?" "Yes, smallholders. Had a daughter of their own. Said the baby was their cousin's, orphaned by influenza." "Do you remember the child's name?" Mrs. Whitlow hesitated. Clara Ridley." Outside, Hastings stared at Poirot as though seeing him anew. "Clara? But that means—" "Yes, Hastings," Poirot said quietly. "She is the child of Arnold Delaford, the unnamed ward in the trust, the rightful beneficiary, if the document still exists. And Philip Benton found out. And perhaps in telling her or someone else, he signed his death warrant." Back at the Assembly Hall, Poirot stood once more at the foot of the stairwell where Benton's body had been found. "It is all clear now," he whispered. "The killer did not strike only out of fear. They struck because they believed the out of person arriving at that stairwell was the true heir, and that destroying them would destroy the threat." Hastings said nothing. The pieces were clicking into place, but something still hung in the air, something unresolved. Poirot turned toward him with a shadowed expression. "But the killer made a grave mistake, Hastings. The umbrella they used to identify the victim was seen from behind. In the dim light of the stairwell, they mistook Philip Benton for Clara Ridley." Hastings's eyes widened. "They killed the wrong heir." Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. The revelation that Clara Ridley was the secret heir to the Delaford Trust cast a long shadow over the case. For Hercule Poirot, however, it was not merely a breakthrough. It was the linchpin around which the entire crime revolved. And yet, even as the truth began to rise like a tide, he withheld it from the public eye, keeping it locked within his own formidable mind. Back in his room at the guest house, Poirot sat at the small desk overlooking the garden, a blank sheet of paper before him and his hands steepled beneath his chin. Hastings watched from the armchair near the hearth. "You're very quiet," Hastings said. "Too quiet. Usually that means you've solved something and you're savoring it." Poirot didn't look up. One does not savor the truth when It tastes of misfortune. One merely prepares to serve it at the proper temperature. Hastings chuckled. You're being poetic again. Poirot finally turned his head. I am being deliberate. There is something the murderer knows, or believes, that must be exposed, Hastings. But first I must confirm my suspicion. There was one inconsistency, so small and yet so revealing. He trailed off, eyes narrowing. Then, without a word, he stood and crossed to his travelling case. From a side compartment he withdrew a folded slip of paper, his own copy of the cloakroom log from the concert night. Number 18, he murmured. Lady Delaford's umbrella. Number 17, Dr. Calder's, the one found discarded. Hastings rose. You think the killer used the log? No, mon ami. I think they avoided it altogether. Poirot paced as he spoke. Consider this. The cloakroom had 2 umbrellas that went missing. One of fine make, easily recognizable, the falcon-handled heirloom. The other, plain and utilitarian. The killer did not need to take both. They only needed to remove Lady Delaford's, so that it could be carried by someone else. Hastings blinked. So they swapped the tags? No, they simply took it directly from the rack. No tag, no fuss. Perhaps they even offered it to Benton. He wouldn't have known the significance. But the killer would know that anyone carrying that umbrella could be mistaken in the gloom for Lady Delaford, and when Benton arrived at the stairwell, he was killed in her place. Poirot nodded gravely. It was meant to look like an accident, a tragic fall, but the blow to the head was too precise, too clean. The moment the killer saw the falcon's handle, they acted. He paused, but then they saw the face and realized their mistake. Poirot's next destination was the home of Dr. Calder. The physician greeted him with a tight-lipped frown and reluctant civility. I suppose you've come to prod my memory again. Only gently, Poirot replied. I wish to know more about the headache that sent you away from the concert early. Calder stiffened. I've told the police already. Migraine. I left at 10:15. Indeed. And your umbrella was found the next morning near the lavatory exit? Yes. Poirot stepped closer. I must ask, did you actually use your umbrella that night? No. It wasn't raining when I left. Then why was it not returned to your possession until after the murder? Calder's eyes narrowed. Are you accusing me? I accuse no one. But I ask, might someone have mistaken your umbrella for Lady Delaford's in the darkness? He did not answer. Poirot changed tack. Dr. Calder, did you know Arnold Delaford? Calder's surprise was genuine. Arnold, barely. He died before I came to Brackenthorp. And yet, Poirot said softly, you knew that Philip Benton was investigating the Delaford Trust. You knew he had spoken to Clara. You knew he had discovered a sealed clause involving an unnamed heir. Calder's fingers clenched. I don't know what you're implying. I imply only this. Someone wanted that inheritance buried. Someone clever enough to plan misdirection, plant evidence, and orchestrate confusion. Calder gave a short, dry laugh. Then you should look at Eleanor Delaford. She's been controlling everyone for years. Poirot turned to leave. Oh, I intend to, monsieur, but not alone. Later that afternoon, Poirot returned to the assembly hall, alone. The hall was quiet, still cloaked in the hush of death and music past. He stepped lightly toward the stairwell, the scene of the crime. Then, with surgical precision, he began to measure the space. The light fixture, the corridor's curve, the distance from the service entrance to the cloakroom. His gaze fell on the scuff marks along the baseboard. Then, crouching low, he examined the screws holding the stair's metal edge. One screw was newer than the rest. Poirot smiled. "Ah," he whispered. "The killer was clever, but not clever enough to avoid haste." He reached into his coat and produced a handkerchief, wrapping it around a small object lodged in the seam between the step and the wall. A button, matte black, ornate. Pocketed it. Back at the guest house, Poirot laid the button on the table and studied it beneath a magnifying glass. It was carved with a crest, one he recognized from the Delaford family seal. But it was not from Lady Delaford's wardrobe. No, it belonged to something older. He pulled a volume from his satchel, Notable British Families and Their Regalia, and flipped to the Delaford entry. There it was, a ceremonial overcoat, worn by members of the household at legal functions, retired decades ago. Except he remembered something, a portrait at the Cartwright home. In the hallway, Edwin Cartwright, wearing that very coat years ago when he served as legal executor during Sir Gregory's estate transfer. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "So that's how the document disappeared. And that is why Philip Benton had to die. But he said nothing to Hastings that evening. Not yet, because Hercule Poirot, master of psychology and deduction, knew something more. The killer had made one final mistake. They believed the game was still theirs to control. But now, the board was his. Chapter 11. Tensions Rise. It was a quiet, clear evening when Hercule Poirot invited all parties involved in the case to join him for tea in the conservatory of the Brackenthorp Hotel. No formal summons, no police accompaniment, just a letter written in Poirot's crisp hand, requesting their presence for a final clarification of perspective. They arrived in staggered order. Lady Eleanor Delaford entered first, elegant as ever but with a flicker of wariness behind her gaze. She seated herself by the tall palms, her gloved fingers resting lightly on the handle of her handbag, as if it might contain a weapon of words. Lillian Cartwright followed, cool and composed in a slate-grey jacket. Her father, Edwin, arrived, close behind, walking slower than usual, his eyes more calculating than tired. Clara Ridley came last, hesitantly, her eyes darting as though expecting accusation to leap from behind the flowers. Poirot was already waiting at the head of the long conservatory table. Tea poured, the porcelain glinting in the sunlight. Hastings stood by the window, watching silently. "My friends," Poirot began gently, "we are close, very close, to the end, and yet it is now, when we near truth, that lies struggle hardest to survive." No one responded. Poirot went on. "You have each said you wish justice, for Mr. Benton, for yourselves, and yet justice cannot bloom in soil where fear is buried." Lady Delaford leaned forward. "You said this would be a clarification, Monsieur Poirot, not another sermon." Poirot inclined his head. "But of course, Let us begin with clarifications then. Edwin Cartwright, you served as executor to Sir Gregory Delaford's estate, did you not? Cartwright stiffened. I did. 20 years ago. During which you handled the formal transfer of the Delaford Trust? Yes. And crucially, you were given access to both the active trust and a sealed addendum to be opened in the event of Lady Delaford's death. A pause. How did you? Poirot raised a hand. That document was removed from the record, monsieur. Deleted from the legal archive, but not from the estate's original ledger. Mr. Benton discovered it, and he traced it back to you. Oh, had no reason to... No legal reason, but perhaps a personal one. Something to do with who the real beneficiary of the trust was. At the far end of the table, Clara stirred in her seat. Her eyes flicked from Poirot to Edwin Cartwright, uncertainty rising in her breath. She had no name then, Poirot said softly, but she had a claim. She was the child of Arnold Delaford. A quiet arrangement, a sealed record. Sir Gregory allowed the funds to be absorbed into the trust rather than dispersed. But someone, perhaps more loyal to Lady Delaford than to truth, saw an opportunity to keep things tidy. I did what I was told, Cartwright said, his voice low and hard. Gregory didn't want scandal. Eleanor threatened to contest everything. Lady Delaford hissed through her teeth. You miserable little man! You told me to destroy it. I told you to review it. You chose to pretend it never existed. Poirot raised his voice slightly. So we see now. A secret forged in, greed maintained by cowardice, and shattered by a single man, Philip Benton. The room fell into silence. Then Clara whispered, He knew. He said he had proof. Poirot nodded. Indeed, he obtained a private copy of the trust addendum. He brought it here, but someone intercepted him, or saw him as a threat, and planned to stop him. He walked to the windows and turned. Imagine you are that person. You expect your enemy to arrive at a stairwell, alone, at night. You know how to identify them. By the object they always carry. A black-handled umbrella. A falcon's head. Yes. Lie in wait, and when you see the silhouette, you strike. Poirot's voice dropped. But you strike the wrong person. Gasps rippled through the group. No, Edwin said quickly, too quickly. No, he must have known. You thought he was Clara. That's why you planted the letter in her drawer. That's why you staged the theft. You needed the story to match. But you forgot the most important fact. Poirot reached into his coat and produced a small polished button. This was found at the stairwell. A button from the ceremonial overcoat once worn by members of the Delaford estate's legal office. An overcoat long retired, except you wore it once. There is a portrait of you wearing it in your study. Edwin's mouth fell slightly open. Lady Delaford turned to him, stunned. You idiot! Lillian stood up, pale. Is this true, father? He looked at her, at everyone, then slowly sat back down, his shoulders sagging. I thought it was her, he muttered. I thought, if she got the inheritance, everything we built would disappear. That girl, out of nowhere, claiming what we protected. Poirot's gaze was cold.